All right.
Oh, there's a help button right here.
Okay, thanks.
Good luck.
Thanks. All right, we're ready to get going. Welcome to the second of these research topics sponsored by the Larner College of Medicine. Thank you for Charlie Irvin, or to Charlie Irvin, for organizing these, and for Aaron for making sure that we have a room and some snacks. Remember, the objective of these is to spend 20 minutes on me going over some information, and the information I'm going to go over today is on NIH Biosketches. And it's being recorded, so you have to be careful about how you ask your questions. All right, so as I was preparing for this lecture, I thought about the best-selling autobiographies currently on Amazon. And we might be familiar with these. We've heard a lot about What Happened by Hillary Rodham Clinton, and the rest of these I've really paid no attention to. This is, I guess, the Bush daughters and a couple of others. So autobiographies, not the best sellers on Amazon, but these are the best of those. So why does someone write an autobiography?
They think they have an interesting story.
Correct. And you're so good. Okay, think like a scientist. Remember, think negative. Why else do you write an autobiography? To get money. I heard it. Adam, thank you. And that's why we write autobiographies. In this case, is to get money. And who's the audience of these autobiographies? Average people? John Q. Public? Jane Q. Public? Right. Who's the audience for your autobiography? And I'll give you a hint. It's 3 people. 3 people. Reviewer 1, reviewer 2, and reviewer 3. You're writing this document that, if you haven't done it before, is going to take you some time, basically for 3 people. And I'll say 4/5 of it is never going to be looked at. Okay? I've reviewed, and I know the reality of reviewers. So what's in your autobiography, and why do you write it? It's a way to present yourself to the world, right? You think you know who you are. You may give an impression to others around you of who you are. But until people read a document like this, they won't be able to tell you who you are. And ultimately, it doesn't matter who you think you are. It's how those people, it's who those people think you are. I remember reading a grant review I got back once, and they said, Matt Poynter does this. I said, I don't do that. But apparently they had gotten that impression. While actions speak louder than words, right? It's really what we do every day that we think is important. These words still have meaning, and it's what goes into this document that's going to be the impression that you leave with those 3 reviewers. So after our session 3 weeks ago, right? You all have a CV. Yes, a curriculum vitae. I have one. It's 47 pages long. No one's going to read that. No one. So we need something that is a little more concise. You have all your publications on PubMed, right? I can look you up. Well, that might be the case, but a reviewer isn't supposed to go to web pages to access information. There are some exceptions to that. And there's this concept of author name ambiguity. Now, who is public-JQ? I can tell you when you look up Poynter-M, you get 108 publications. And 7 of those are really interesting, but I had absolutely nothing to do with them. Although if you looked at the timing and you looked at the topics, it seems very reasonable that I could have, except for the one on tooth decay. So reviewers need a concise and a functional bibliographical document to evaluate a bunch of things. These include the applicant's training record, their employment, their areas of expertise, in other words, the impact of their work, and their funding record. Ultimately, this is the information you're trying to convey through your autobiography. And your autobiography is called a biosketch. That's the nomenclature that the National Institutes of Health uses. There are other biosketches that other funding agencies use, but their format will not be the same. So what I'm focusing on today is where we get most of our money, those of us in the College of Medicine, and that's through the NIH. So let's look about what the NIH says about biosketches. Now, you might have heard that there's a new biosketch format. Now, it's not really new because it was first announced in December of 2014. And this is a notice that came out from the Office of the Director, and it goes into effect in 2015, and it was the 32nd one of those. All right, so that's what those numbers and letters mean. This is the title, New Biographical Sketch Format Required for NIH and AHRQ grant applications, submitted after May 25th, 2015. So we've been doing a new biosketch format for about 2.5 years. And those of you who don't have old ones, it doesn't really matter. But the new one really is an improvement, but it's a lot more work. You can maybe go to this link if Aaron ends up posting it to take a look at what this notice said. And what it did say is that the new BioSketch is limited to 5 pages. I believe it used to be 4, so it actually increased in length. And the old BioSketch used to have a bunch of papers, and it had your funding. That was about it. The new BioSketch describes up to 5 of the researchers' most significant contributions to science, along with a historical background that forms a framework for that work. It can outline the central findings of the prior work and the influence of those findings that they've had on field. And if you're involved in team science, it can say what your role is going to be either in the previous team science or in the new team science. So if you're a bioinformatician and you've contributed to hundreds and hundreds of papers and it's not really clear what you did, you'll want to say that here. You know, your expertise may be evident, but it might not be. So you're going to want to use this as an opportunity to explain who you are and what you do. And what's nice about these most significant contributions is that you get to cite 4 papers or products, research products, right? As a director of CMB, I'm always told that isn't the requirement that you have 2 papers before you leave? Well, yes, that's kind of our currency as papers, but honestly, dissertations can have other metrics by which they're evaluated. So you can have patents, data research materials, databases, education-related curricula, instruments or equipments, models, protocols, software, netware, a whole bunch of different things that are of your original thinking, with your hands and your head, but they don't have to be papers. It's best if you have papers, I can tell you as a reviewer. And what's really nice too is that now there's a link to the full list of the researchers' published works. This is the information on a website that reviewers can access if they so choose. So there's 2 formats for the NIH Biosketch, and I can see we've got people that would use both in this room. The instructions and forms are going to be at this link, and the biographical sketch for key personnel, that's generally the more senior people. Once you've maybe completed a postdoc, you could be considered to be key personnel. And those for fellowship applications are a little bit different. But we're going to actually go over both because I knew there'd be both types of people in the audience. So how is a NIH Biosketch formatted? And I'm going to go over each of these sections, so they're a little bit sparse here. We first have a header. We then have a personal statement with 4 relevant citations, and we'll go over how this differs from section C. So A is a personal statement. B are your prior positions, current positions, and any honors. C are your contributions to science. And D is your research support or scholastic performance, and perhaps both, depending on what position you're at. So let's take a look at the header. Just like in kindergarten or preschool, the first thing you put on the paper is your name. All right, so that's first. The second is your ERA Commons username. Now, how many of you in this room have one, an ERA Commons username? So you're either on training grants or you are grant applicant yourself. At some point, Graham, that's when you first needed one, right? Was when you got assigned to the training grant. So at some point, this will become necessary for you to get a common user's name. And ERA Commons is the way with which those of us who use NIH for funding interact with it electronically. You'll need your position title. You'll need your past education and training. And you're going to begin with your baccalaureate degree or other professional education you might have had. Include your postdoc, your residency, clinical fellowship training, each listed separately. And for each of these entries, you want to provide where, you want to provide what degree, you want to provide when, and what it was in. You can get creative here too, by the way. So you then need a personal statement. You need to describe why you are the best person in the world to do what you're saying you want to do. And what you're saying you want to do is going to differ depending on each different grant application that you submit. You're going to want to, after this personal statement, cite up to 4 publications of research projects that highlight your experience and qualifications. Again, those are going to differ depending on the grant application. And we'll go into that a little bit. I'll use an example of mine and we can see how this might get catered to different audiences. Yes, yep. This could be important for some, and I've seen this in applications I reviewed. If there are factors that affected your past productivity, you decided that you were going to do some sort of sabbatical for a number of years. You were going to take a break from research. You had family care responsibilities, you know, a parent or children or relatives. If you yourself were ill or disabled, you had to go away from military service, you can put that in here. And I've seen just about each of these. Indicate whether you published or created research products under a different name. So if you changed your last name for some reason or your first name. You can mention specific contributions to science that aren't included in the section C, but don't be redundant. You can't use figures, tables, or graphics, so it's not like some conference abstracts that you might put out. And if you're looking for dissertation research award, you should also include a description of your career goals, career trajectory, interest in specific areas of research that are designated in that funding opportunity announcement. So positions and honors is B. Yes.
What's the current thing that whether or not that should help or hurt the choices? Like if you put in there, is it likely to get possible?
I think you have, it's like a coin flip, an equal chance. You know, why couldn't the person deal with whatever adversity was set before them? Or, you know, this is a very legitimate reason, and I've seen both argued in front of study section. Productivity is always a metric by which people are evaluated, and if there's a, you know, if there's a gap and it's obvious, and you have what you feel is a legitimate reason to explain it, I would include it instead of letting it be ambiguous. So your positions and honors, chronological order of the positions that you've held, concluding with your current position. Achievements or honors, in particular, students, postdocs, and junior faculty should include any scholarships like training grants, traineeships, fellowships, development awards that you might have received. Clinicians need information on their licensures, board certifications. So that's pretty straightforward. And contributions to science. This is where you're going to spend a lot of time. You want to think about your 5 most significant contributions to science if you're a new or established investigator. You need to have a description of each that's no longer than about a half of a page, including the 4 citations. Graduate students, postdocs, you don't have to have 5. You don't have to make things up. They recommend including 2 or 3 so that you have something. And if you just have 1, you just have 1. Let's be honest. You know, people are going to look at that depending on the type of application that you're submitting and the amount of time that you've been in the field. So again, kind of like the personal statement, for each contribution, indicate the historical background that frames the scientific problem, the central findings, and the influence or the impact of those findings, and tell what you did in that work. You can describe these 4, you can have these 4 publications or research materials, research products might be included. And then a web link to your published work. It has to be a .gov suffix, so don't use Google Scholar for this. Otherwise, reviewers aren't expected to be able to access it. It's not a requirement to have this, but I've never seen an application without it. You can include mention of things that are under development, such as manuscripts that are in preparation, but you can't cite them in these 4 publications because obviously they aren't yet published. Yes? I'm not familiar with that name. Is that a .gov? Looks like Gary might know something about it. Would you like to respond?
Yeah, I can answer that. So that's actually the 4th bullet point down needs to be revised. So you are now actually allowed to cite things that are in the file. NIH made that rule change 6 months ago or so. And it means that if you posted a preprint, you can include it as evidence of contribution or inclusion.
So that wasn't the answer to that question, though.
That was kind of my question. Can you include something that is published on bioarchive
Okay.
Yeah, you have to be careful with different funders. They might not all, but NIH might allow it, which is very important.
So your research support and scholastic performance. So list anything that you've completed or have ongoing from the last 3 years. You're not supposed to include your effort on it or the amount of money. The objective of having the research support is to highlight your accomplishments and those of your colleagues as scientists. Now, a lot of us in the room won't have any research support. So we have scholastic performance we can use instead. So this is where it differs between the pre-doc, postdoc, trainee type application and those for the more established types of investigators. So you want to put undergraduate institution, graduate, professional courses, grades. Explain if you have an unusual grading system other than 0 to 100, 4-point scale, A through F, anything like that, that might be unusual. And if you can indicate the levels required for a passing grade. So the established, early stage, and new investigators terms that the NIH uses will generally only include the research support. If you're doing a career development type of an award, you might complete the research support. But for a lot of the people in the room, the research support section is not necessary. Instead, you're going to use the scholastic performance section. So for dissertation grants or for postdocs. So what does this all look like? And I use an example that I've prepared pretty recently. First thing to look at is this is a form page that the NIH mandates. And since I put this together a couple weeks ago, there's actually a newer one that goes through 2020. So these are still approved through October of 18, but there's actually a new one already. It differs very, very subtly, but this is one of the things that someone could maybe ding you on if they so chose. So this is the header section. Here's my name, my user comment, my position title, and my training history. Now, my degree was in experimental pathology. It doesn't mean a lot to anyone. It doesn't reflect the immune part that I did. So this is where I, could be creative. It's the field of study. It's not the degree conferred. Okay. So then I have a personal statement. So I have a statement that says what I do in my laboratory, what techniques I used, and then this is for a T32 application we're putting in. And so I wanted to highlight here that since we're going in as a multiple PI, that I've actually been a PI in training for the last section of this, and that I've trained a bunch of students in my laboratory, that I'm head of the CMB program, things like that. So people can read that and say, okay, this guy can probably work with people to help train. And then, so what papers should I cite along with this that go along with what I've done? So I've chosen to go by what I've done recently under a single topic. And recently we've been doing a lot of things with obese asthma. So these are all recent papers that have to do with obese asthma. So section B then, the positions and honors. After I completed my postdoc, I became an assistant professor, and then what I've done since, the honors that I've had. I think people like to see if you've done any reviewing for government agencies. So those are the study sections on which I've served. Yep. Yeah, I think at that point, this more reflects past accolades rather than the 3 years for me. So I think if it's within the 3 years, you'll have to put it into the funding. If it is beyond that point, say you had a pre-doctoral one and you're now more than that out, you want to put it into the honors. So then contributions to science, and I start with what I did as a grad student, steroid hormone regulation of age-associated immune dysregulation, and then what I started doing as a postdoc, airway epithelial NF-kappa B and allergic asthma, and then reactive oxygen species and inflammation, nitrogen dioxide in allergic inflammation and asthma, and then airway epithelial products as immunomodulators. So I have here basically a short narrative on what I did, what my contribution was, and how it might have influenced the scientific community. And then I have my citations under there. So they're about a half a page each. I have the complete list of published work in my bibliography, and we'll come back to this in a couple of slides. And then I have research support. So I have ongoing research support. I have the number, the PIs, the dates, the institution, the title, my role, and then what we're doing. And so you're supposed to capture what you've done in the last 3 years, so then you have past support as well. So a 5-page document, it's pretty straightforward. Let me go back here to the slides. So, do you only need one BioSketch? Perhaps at the beginning, yes. You know, you've got a limited amount of things that you're trying to do, and you have a limited number of accomplishments, so you can have a single BioSketch. Later on in your career, the answer is probably no. You'll need to cater your personal statement to reflect the specific application to which you're applying. You need to highlight the papers most relevant to the proposal or published with co-investigators on the application. I always like to, if I'm going in as a co-investigator, those first 4 papers after my personal statement, I like to include those that I've recently published with as collaborators. I like to keep my name bold so they can see, okay, that's where he is within the list of authors. And then I like to underline the co-investigators. I think it's easy on the eyes. So you have a CV, so use your CV to keep your BioSketch up to date, right? Especially at the beginning. Every time that you update your CV, go ahead and see where it needs to have a reflection made into your BioSketch as well. And make the document easy to read. Use uniform formatting throughout. I've seen some come to me because when co-investigators send their BioSketches, you know, there'll be 4 different fonts, and, you know, just be consistent, make it simple. Make sure it's grammatically correct, it's spell checked. Again, I said I like your name in bold. And then oftentimes these get converted to the NIH through PDF Maker, and make a PDF yourself and make sure that it doesn't look bad, because I've definitely seen things happen during the conversion process. So there are tools to help you build the BioSketch. I don't find them useful, but this might be a worthy investment early. So for some of you, you might like this. There's something called Science CV, the Science Expert Network CV. So it creates BioSketches for the NIH and for other federal agencies, so it could be more broadly useful. And I'm going to try to go to it here, and I'll have to log in. Even though I logged in on this computer earlier, I think it probably logged me out. All right, so this is the website. And you can see here's the Science CV and NIH Biosketch. And there's information here. There's even a nice video. If you can't find yourself sleeping at night, I recommend that. But it's really incumbent upon having a My Bibliography. Does anyone have My Bibliographies, especially the grad students yet? Those of you who have a couple of papers, especially once you get NIH dollars, NIH is going to want to make sure that you're submitting to the NIH all of your publications. And so we have something called My Bibliography, and I'm going to try to access it here through the Commons. That's not the easy way to do it. Try here through my NCBI, and then I'm going to do it through Commons. Okay. All right, so this is my bibliography. Okay, it's got 106 items in it because you can submit your own. So at some point in the beginning, I put my dissertation in there. It's published, it's been reviewed. It's published by the University of Utah Press. So it's a publication, even though you wouldn't find it on PubMed, but you can find it in my bibliography. So every time that we get a publication, we have to load it onto here. Sometimes it'll ask you if it's ready to be added. I see I've got a warning here that I put one in manually, And now it's actually been published. And so it's asking me to approve. Is this the actual paper that you meant? And yes, it is. So I can go ahead and finish, and then they'll update it. Now I won't have any warnings. Once you get NIH funding, you're going to need to keep this up to date so that you don't have any warnings when you submit progress reports. It's even important for if you're on a training grant. But anyways, this has a list of all of my publications. And with this, then, I can go to my BioSketch. I'm sorry, I'm going to go back here. It's hard for me to see at that angle. So I can go to my NCBI here. And one of the links down here is to Science CV. So I started my CV, it was like in 2013, and I gave up on it because I find it easier to keep up to date in a Word document than to do it here because I've got different purposes for having a BioSketch. But early in your career, like I said, this might be a worthy investment. So what it does is it asks you a bunch of different questions that go along with the same format that we described, or I described to you earlier. So it's got my name, it's got my Commons ID, it's got my education and training, and it saw that I was on an NIH training grant and it wants me to fill in this information. I tried earlier last week and I just couldn't get it to accept. It was a bit of a pain in the butt. So you can see that my education and training isn't complete. You can put in a personal statement. You can select citations from my bibliography. You can put in positions and honors, and you can see where you can edit them. Contributions to science, edit section, and then once you've got a section, it'll ask you to populate it from my bibliography with any of the papers that you have. And then funding as well. So there is that tool. Check it out and see if it's worth your time early on in your careers. No, not that I've seen. Because it's not going to go back, yeah, that far. So that's what I have for you. If you've got questions or we want to discuss things further, I welcome you to ask or give some feedback. Vicki.
I was saying that, Amy, it's almost like a letter for, you know, because you're saying this is why I am, you know, a good person for this.
Right. I mean, the body of your application ends up being, this is what I want to do. And granted, we have background in there that you try to bolster what you've contributed to that. But this is really what the reviewers are supposed to evaluate as far as who you are and what you're potentially capable of, based on, you know, past performance being an indication of future success. Right.
For the private one, they also require biosectors, or is it more like personal statement?
It's going to depend on the agency. So I've, you know, had some private foundation funds, and you know, you think your BioSketch was a lot of work putting it together. Trying to unwrap the BioSketch and put it into the format that other funding agencies want can be, you know, time consuming. It's not difficult, it's just time consuming and frustrating. So I think that this is the most complete, but you might have to reformat the way some things are presented. You know, there's even, I know I applied to something that was reverse chronological order. It's like, why? You know, it just, you know, why make it difficult? Adam.
As a reviewer, which part does it focus on?
Page 1. Yep. Personal statement and what the most important papers they think are. And I mean, let's get really pessimistic. I mean, a lot of reviewers look at the first line. And what's the first line? Your name. Do I recognize the name? It's unfortunate, but it's a reality. You got to make a good name for yourself.
Does that mean that you should that you should get those 4 publications or 5 on that first page, you know, so that your personal statement is short enough that that's all on one page?
I think it's a good idea. People, I've read solid blocks that are a page long, and I don't get anything more out of it than I got during the first few lines of it. Really, you have to have, that's why, having multiple biosketches as you become more senior really is important, because I don't need to know everything that person has ever done to evaluate what their contribution will be to that application. It's really keep it concise and cater it specifically, and do try to get those onto that first page. It's almost like the specific aims page of a grant application. You want that to be such that people want to turn the page to the next, and they really believe you after that one-page investment of their time. Charlie?
So I'm currently chairing an online study session. And one of the reviewers raised a question about the expertise of one of the participants in that. And so they go into the biosketch. So does this person actually have an expertise in this area, this thing? So that's one reason. The second reason is you read along the grant and they'll say, oh, pointers. And you go, well, they'll just list this name. And they're like, well, what's this role? Maybe it's not clear. So they wouldn't read that first paragraph, the first mistake, says my role in the grant is that. And then, and this is a bit snarky, so take it. Some of the grants I read are really large and have many files. And I kind of go through them just quickly to see if they've actually said what their goal was, or they just throw in the biosketch from the grant they put in a month ago that has nothing to do with the application. And it just sort of shows, that the applicant isn't effort to prepare. And then I guess the last point I'd make is that a lot of times I'm asked in my biosketch not to go to do so. Because some people, rather than getting 47-page long CD like that, they just want something a little differently too, so they don't have to interpret it. See how this would help them do that. So that's just another.
I know your personal statements going to differ for each grant submission. How much do your contributions pay for those? Pretty much, maybe have like 6 or 7 ones that you really could choose specifically for a grant. Or you can just kind of like, all right, here they are.
If I had all the time in the world, I might cater them, but honestly, I don't switch them up hardly at all. I think I have 6. You're allowed 5, and there's one that'll vacillate between depending on if I want to include it or not. Like I said, unfortunately, people spend most time on that first page, that first section, first 2 sections, the header and section A. Gary.
I was just going to suggest that in their personal statement and in their contributions to science, most people have a sentence of each of those saying, and therefore this was very important to the field. And I think it's really useful if you have actual data to show it's useful for the field. So if you have a paper that was mentioned in Faculty of 1,000, you should include it there. If it was covered in the News and Views in Nature, you should include it there. If it was cited 300 times, you should include it there. Anything that you can provide that's real data rather than you just saying this had an impact, I think is helpful.
Right. I remember, Corey, since you're in the room, I'll say, I remember Corey once suggesting, it's not the applicant's job to tell me something significant.
Right.
It's significant if it's significant. And so that's a great way to include a metric, right?
Where do you put that? Like, would you put that in the citation at the end and like a parentheses and say?
Some people do that, or you can put it in an paragraph saying, in one of these papers was cited 300 times in the field, and the average in my field is 25 or something. That really conveys how important it was.
Yeah, they even changed font or somehow, so when they see it as they're paging through, what's that's grabbing my attention?
But some people do put it in the citation itself that was covered by facts from 1,000 of
Yes.
Some of these things are hard to quantify. So therefore, my case is or anything, I would have to resort to this. You know, like that's not,
Right.
not really besides hearsay. How do you, if you have many kinds of like that, how do you like that to quantify a number and we all have
I don't have a good answer because I had someone from the EPA come up and say, you know, that paper reviews that influence policies that we implemented. Well, you know, I can't write it exactly like that, so I don't capture it at all. So I'm not the best person to ask. Gary, you have an opinion? Yeah, but you can't put that in, you know, to one sentence onto a biosketch. Yeah, you can put it elsewhere, but as far as where does it go onto a biosketch?
It measures the relative impact of a publication by measuring how many times that publication is then cited, and then exponentially measuring that forward. The tool is available. You can put your name in there, and it will pretty much show up all the most relevant publications, and it's sorted backwards. So, eyesight, PIT, and you can just try that. Try to Dr. Poynter's name and see what that stores up, and you can then see which would be the most attractive.
Yeah, and the best thing really is your EPA example is great. So like, hopefully somebody got somewhere that they read your paper in this policy. You know, that it was perfectly fair. No, that was a good way to kind of broaden it. And some of you don't have that very not necessarily
No,
as
it's very bland over there, but that's the reason why the NIH came out with this.
I think the question is a really good one, and there's a sort of a classic example in the field. There was a paper in Johnson that talked about how you measure collateral damage in a field of war, and that was read by a few scientists, but it was read by a lot of military people, it was read by a lot of politicians. It actually changed NATO policy on how they dealt with collateral casualties. So if I offered that paper, you can bet I would put in my personal statement, this paper changed NATO policy on how to do it. Even though there isn't something I would encourage you to put anything in there at all, that whether it's quantifiable or not, it's true.
Yeah. Well, and frankly, like what you mentioned with that paper changing policy, yeah, that can be grabbed even more in the title of paper policy.
Yeah.
And I may not.
Because you wouldn't see it in the paper title.
Right.
Yeah. Gary, any thoughts on thought leaders' contributions that might not be through peer reviewed? This is where you get into some of the products. There are certain individuals, at least in my field, who don't necessarily do a lot of science, but they comment on it a lot and they change the way the field moves.
So you mean that's one of your contributions to science?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of us aren't there yet, or may never be there, but you know, it's tough how to even cite it. You know?
I personally think it's legit. I have one of my 5 sections. I have a section that has no publications, but it's on contributions to science communication programs. Because I think I've spent a lot of time on it, and so I think you can include things that aren't quantifiable, that aren't citation or publication driven. If it's they're looking for contributions to science.
Mm-hmm.
You could really, you know, convince a reader that you could make a contribution.
And the reason why I'm asking that is because there are many reports that are very, very diverse. So I think that the more that those words have a very quantifiable thing, but I do have other things that are not quantifiable.
Yeah, I can see we have a lot of CMB students in here and people from similar disciplines. It would be interesting to look at like some of the people who come from other disciplines, education backgrounds, patient care service providers, healthcare service providers, see what their biosketches look like, what their contributions look like. You know, we say pretty, I don't know, we say contributions to science, but not everything that NIH funds is a scientific endeavor. Yet they require BioSketch in order to gain access to that funding.
Dr. Poynter, I think I need to introduce myself. My name is Gaurav. I'm going to be working in the Department of Medicine of Brand Specialist. And one of the ideas that we have been floating around is that we're going to have libraries of biosketches with permission of the original PIs and authors, and have that available to our community, so that then they can see what has been done in the past and see if that is something that applies to their brand community. The other thing I wanted to say was the BioSketch, as you've shown, I have a BioSketch dummy template that I like to send out to people who are strapped for that. And it's got all the contributions to science, you know, it's got these placeholders for everything, and you then just need to plug it in. And that's again another thing that we've been discussing. We will have templates, the BioSketch, and for some of the support documents. You know, boilerplate stuff
Right.
that you really don't need to be wasting your time on, and then you just tailor it to your. So these are just a few things that we're working on, and hopefully they should be available to the community.
Great, thank you. No more questions? Yes.
As an old school, I never. Unless it's a for some of you people know. That's old school. That's very old school. Well, I did it for 40 years.
Another quick question. When you look at the doesn't mean you look at
What institution?
the one where you're coming from, you're applying. Either where you got your degree or where the application is from.
I've done Ks, and so absolutely I do, because I have to know that the institutional commitment was good, but I wasn't doing like postdoc, I was doing for fellows, so people who are looking to get their next faculty position from that institution. I don't know if anyone else in the room has reviewed it at a more junior level than that, but it isn't because its name is Yale versus UVM. It's about knowing what the infrastructure is like there. Is there, you know, a breadth within that particular field? Are there, you know, the equipment? Is there the intellectual infrastructure to support that person, that applicant?
For years, that was changed. Years ago, over the past 4 or 5 years, the ability to do kinds of research that large institutions do, and a lot of small institutions that really very good. Why should these people reconsider their approach to all this stuff?
So along those lines, then, and another part of the grant, then, because you can include kind of like what's the equipment available? Is that you just kind of dump that, like, here's all the shared resource centers at the university to kind of bolster that aspect? Which, I mean, you may get one who like who still just doesn't care, but bring that information.
Well,
Yeah.
right. But if they just don't exist,
Yeah.
you know, there's some higher level bioinformatics things that just don't exist in the state compared to what's happening in Broad Institute or other places that are within earshot almost.
It's not just solely on that clear what you're doing that you take this project, what you think more detail, greater detail. You have to know what other institutions do, and you have to do what is it that I'm proposing to do in the context of this kind of
Yeah, environment.
And then it's clearly much better to do single cell sequencing than what you propose to do. That's the initiative. Do a review or something, wherever. And then it's so that's kind of awesome. That's my experience. That's here.
The other thing is if you are collaborating with an institution and if it is formal collaboration, you are then allowed to include their facilities and resources in your application. That goes in at University of Minnesota. They will be providing this particular, they have this infrastructure, and the PI that I'm collaborating with over there is going to be providing this access to Poynter. So you are allowed to, but it needs to be a formal process. It's not something that you can then just say, oh, we will reach out to them. But they do allow you to then upload their facility in.
I'm not quite as cynical as Corey. Almost. Yeah, I don't. Well, I think the way to get around that is by being the individual who's best work. I think that helps a lot. So I think if Corey submits a grant on, mouse models of multiple sclerosis, I think that's more important for reviewers. Corey is submitting that, no matter where it is. Now, the whole grant is about, some very cutting edge full genome technology that we don't have to read it. But I think the fact that this grant coming from Corey is more important than Berg. And I think you can do that with your collaborators too. And I put that in that first paragraph, the personal statement, why we're the perfect group for doing this. And if we do have some resource, I have a microscope that's good for a particular thing. I put that in there so that even though I'm at UVM and not in there, I want to convince them that we're the right people and have what it takes to do it. So I think there is, I don't deny that there is a zip code thing that we have to deal with, but I think we can build our company. That's the half full.
Well, the other thing too is, at least with the work that we do that is clinical or translational, the demographics of our patient population here are not representative of the rest of the country. And yeah. Yep. And so we collaborate with Duke, who happened to have every one of their mouse pulmonary function papers had to get retracted over the last couple of years. So we can't do mouse work with them, but we can do human work with them. Because they didn't use the instrument that was invented by a faculty member here. You gotta trust your technicians. All right, thanks everyone for good discussion.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, you said that preprint rule was a really important rule, because there's very little.
It was in here, I think.
Cite only public papers. That's the thing that has changed. And,
A lot of people don't know about preprints and I don't know about that, so don't take them seriously. The minute you're engaged in preprints being submitted to the bioarchive, why not? It's particularly important for junior people, right? Because they're applying for a fellowship or for their first grant, and they're only allowed to cite published work. They all have publications that are literature, which they might not have otherwise done, but now there's a real incentive. I think it's. Yeah, exactly. Are you obsessing about it? Yeah. So you would list it just like a publication, but instead of a journal name, it has a DOI that brings you to the Bible archive.
So I've never encountered anything there. Am I missing out on?
Oh, yes, yeah. Well, there's an,
Because I have to go search for it, that's why it's not coming.
it's not indexed. So it depends. What you're missing out on is something that a competitor or a might post it there, and you get to see it 5-6 months before it's actually published.